Well, good morning. I'm glad it's a good, clear Tennessee day. I thought for a while we were going to have rain today, but it doesn't look that way. I want to make a short statement, and then I want to introduce Ed Carter and Mike Butler and let them make a short statement. Then we'll stick around here for a while. We're here today to talk about fishing below the Cumberland River dams. Next week in the United States Senate, I'm going to introduce legislation that will seek to delay the ability of the Corps of Engineers to implement what I consider to be an unreasonable and unnecessary plan to restrict fishing below these dams. I wish I didn't have to do that. I would like for the Corps to be able to work with the TWRA and the Wildlife Federation and people in this area to let fishermen continue to do what they've done and still provide for the public safety, and I think we could do that. But here's the problem. I believe, and I think most people believe, that fishing while the water's coming spilling through the dams is unsafe. But on the Tenn Cumberland River dams and its tributary, the water comes through the dam about 10% of the time, 20% of the time. The other 80%, it doesn't come through. And to restrict fishing below the dams 100% of the time, even though the water spills through the dams only 20% of the time, would be like keeping the gate down over a railway crossing 100% of the time. The track's not dangerous if the train's not coming. And this water's not dangerous if the water's not spilling. So that would be a reasonable rule. Now the TWRA and others have said to the Corps, we'll be glad to work with you to help improve safety. There are ways to do this. TVA has dams. It uses warning. It uses lights. It has reasonable warnings for fishermen who want to fish near the dams. If the legislation that I'm introducing doesn't work, I have other legislation I could introduce. I'm on the Appropriations Committee that oversees the Corps funding. And when I have a chance to do it, when the Congress will pass an appropriations bill, I can try to pass legislation that will prevent them from taking $2.6 million and using it to erect these physical barriers. That's the other problem with this plan. We're in a budget crunch. We're supposed to be out of money in Washington, and I'd like to know where the $2.6 million is coming from that ought to be used for recreation facilities and other core projects to put these physical barriers up. So I think it's unreasonable, unnecessary, and a waste of money to go forward with this plan. Now, the better way to resolve this would be for TWRA and others in the area to work with the Corps. And the Corps people are good people. They say they're just following a policy they've had. But there are 17 or 18 former colonels, people who've commanded the area, who've allowed this fishing before. And there ought to be a way to come up with a compromise that permits it. So I'm here today to say that if the Corps says it requires legislation, well, I've got legislation, and I'm going to try to pass it if that's what it takes. Now, I want to thank Congressman Whitfield from Kentucky. He's been a real leader in this. So have the county judges up in Kentucky. Congressman Cooper came to a meeting that Congressman Whitfield and I had with the general. I met with the colonel, I met with the general. If necessary, I'll meet with the Assistant Secretary of the Army. This is a policy they have. It's not a rule, it's a policy. They ought to be able to make a reasonable adjustment to it. We're talking about some of the best fishing waters anywhere. We're talking about jobs in the area, and we're talking about taxpayer money that doesn't need to be wasted. Now, I'd like to give you a chance to hear from Ed Carter, who's the Executive Director from the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency.
Thank you, Senator. And let me say publicly thank you for all you've done, both behind the scenes and as you see here this morning. And we really appreciate that effort everywhere that we've been and everyone that we've talked with. Since 1965, our agency has been the sole state agency that's charged with boating safety in the state of Tennessee. And we've always been the agency that's responsible for the fisheries and the fishing recreation. It's important both recreationally and it's important economically, and we want to make sure that both of those are addressed. And our message to the Corps has been, We believe that there are other methods, other alternatives that aren't being explored at this particular time that will leave both the boating safety intact and also open the recreational fisheries, which are some of the absolute finest in this part of the state and anywhere actually in the southeast. So we want to make sure that both of those go forward. We're willing to work with the Corps. As it stands right now, if they put the barricades up, it's not something we can enforce, nor would we enforce. But if we change to some other alternative methods that make that possible, then we're certainly willing to work with them on that respect. So we appreciate greatly the working relationship we've had with them and hope it continues, but we don't believe that the method they're going on now is one that's sound for economics or sound for recreational benefits in Tennessee. So thank you, Senator.
Mike Butler is the Chief Executive Officer of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Mike?
Some 250 years ago, our Supreme Court ruled that fish and wildlife in this country are owned by the people of this country. And this simple but profound decision is the underpinning behind everything that makes our model for wildlife management the best in the world, and why we have to have access to our resources, these waters and these fish. Generations of you guys here today, your sons, your fathers, have fished these waters and have proven that this is a safe pastime. When we use common sense and we wear our life jackets, it's a safe pastime, and it'll continue to be a safe pastime. But unfortunately, we're faced with this proposal to close off these waters. Some will say, what's all this fuss to do about fishing? It's just a little 1,000 feet here, 500 feet there. What I say to you today is, ask them, what's more important than fishing with your son or your daughter, with your father or your mom, or with a good friend? What's more important than supporting the jobs in the Middle Tennessee area that are supported by this activity? And lastly, what's more important than celebrating this small remaining example of self-reliance that we enjoy today when we get to go fish? The Corps is saying this is about safety. We understand that. We appreciate that. We value human life and safety below these dams. I think the Senator pointed out very well, we have 18 previous district commanders and several different division commanders that have not seen fit to make a change since the 1970s. And the reason that they didn't make that change is because the change is unnecessary and, in our opinion, extreme in policy. So the thing that concerns us, maybe the greatest, is it's also a process that did not allow for meaningful public input. But thankfully, we live in a country that allows us to have a voice. And thankfully, we have a senator that is willing to stand up in the gap, propose legislation to fix this challenge. And as we close, let me reemphasize one point. I think it's very important that we do our part as anglers, that we practice common sense when we're below the dams, and that we all wear the life jackets that we're supposed to wear and follow the law as it's written. Because what we have shown, the statistics are on our side, ladies and gentlemen. When we wear our life jackets and we implement common sense approaches, it's safe. And so roughly 1 million Tennesseans fish in this state every year. And I would ask, now it's our time as outdoorsmen and citizens to stand behind the senator and support his efforts to make sure that we keep these waters open. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, Mike. I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad to stand up for the people of Tennessee and for the 1 million who have fishing licenses in Tennessee. This is an important right. And I think the Corps says, well, we need legislation. Well, I've got legislation. We'll try to pass legislation, but a better result would be to listen to what the Wildlife Resources Agency says. They're saying, look, we believe in safety. We'll help you enforce the safety laws. We'll come, safety practices, and we'll come to some reasonable solution. And I think it is reasonable. I'll conclude with this. This is a lot like the railroad crossing. If the water's only coming through the dam 20% of the time, that means 80% of the time it ought to be safe. It ought to be safe for fishing. And you don't keep the railroad gate down over the railroad crossing 100% of the time. You keep it down when the train's coming down the track. We can have the warning signs. We can police the area. We can close the parking lots during the time when the water's coming through the dams and still leave the tailwaters open for fishing 80% of the time. And the state agencies, both in Tennessee and Kentucky, have said to the Corps of Engineers, we'll work with you to try to encourage boating safety and to help you enforce those rules. That's a reasonable proposal, and I'm going to continue to encourage the Corps of Engineers to do that. I've asked for an appointment. I met with the colonel, I've met with the general, now I've asked for an appointment with the Assistant Secretary of the Army, and if that doesn't work, then the legislation will, I'll do my best to see that we pass legislation and we get a delay in this until we get a result. Thank you for coming this morning. Thanks to Ed and Mike.